All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Hailey. How you doing?
Very well. Thanks
All
for
right.
having me.
All right. It's that time of year, getting close to Christmas. That's when we're filming this anyway.
Yeah.
So I wanted to have you on to kind of, obviously, this is the time of year where you lost your dad very suddenly. I probably avoided it for a while because it kind of reminds me of my story with my mom, who also died of a heart attack.
Right.
Similar age. How old was your dad? I can't remember.
He was 69? Yeah.
Yeah.
69.
My mom was 66, so it's similar. It's like, okay, they're older, but you really
Yeah.
thought you had, he was a healthy guy, at least.
Yeah.
on the
Yeah. He
surface.
really was. Yep.
Wasn't like, it's like, I saw that coming,
No,
with some people, but not
nobody-
with him. It was
Nobody saw anything coming.
fit, so it was just one of those things. Yeah. So take us, as hard as that is, take us back to that day. Like, how did you find out it happened? What took place?
Okay. So it was a Sunday morning, and I remember being in my bathroom, getting ready for church.
Yeah.
And so let's see, it'll be just coming up on the 6-year anniversary. So,
Wow.
my kids are all pretty independent. They're doing their thing, getting
Yeah.
ready. I'm getting ready. And I think it was my mom had called and just had said something like, oh, can you, pray for dad? He's on his way to the hospital. Maybe had some chest pains or something like that. So we knew that there was something bad, but I'm not the kind of person that like immediately goes to the worst thing in my mind.
Yeah. Good.
So I'm still trying to like keep it positive, like, okay, maybe I should be worried, but he's going to be fine. Things will be fine.
Right.
So I'm just going to
Like you said,
keep
he
going.
didn't seem like a candidate for that.
Right.
So you're not.
And it didn't like my mom's phone call didn't come across as like a total panic or like come down to the hospital now or anything like that. It was just
Was
like,
it in reality? Is that just your mom's version of it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. And I don't know if that was just even me being like, oh, she's trying to keep it together. Maybe she was more nervous, but didn't really have a good legitimate reason to be yet.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it was just her trying to be calm in the conversation so that I wouldn't overreact.
Yeah, or even trying to convince herself, which is a big
Right.
coping mechanism.
Right.
too.
Because, come to find out later, the events of the day, I think she probably was pretty nervous
Yeah.
because she witnessed some things. But from my point of view, it was like, okay, I'm getting a call. Something happened with dad and he's on his way to the hospital. But in my mind, glass
It'll be
half
fine.
full. He's going to be fine. That's just how I am. I'm like, things are going to be fine. Don't overreact. So it's just like, there's a little part of me that was like, maybe I should be worried. Maybe I should be scared. I'm definitely praying.
And
I
you were
might
headed. You were headed to the hospital. You weren't going to.
No, I was
you were
headed to
still gonna go to
church. It was just like,
Okay.
yeah, he's just going. I'll keep you posted, kind of a thing.
Well, the thing with heart stuff too, like I always say that if they catch it, they can fix almost anything.
Right.
It's not like you'd rather have a heart issue than a back issue as long as they find it, but it can also
Right.
kill you like nothing.
Right.
Like that.
So I really didn't know any details at that point, just
Yeah.
that something with his heart and he was going to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I wasn't freaking out. I was just kind of like praying and being like, okay, I guess we'll hear things. Do you need somebody to come with you? I think maybe it was a question. My sister was going because my sister's a nurse. So,
Yeah.
it's nice to have a medical professional with you. So I just kind of went about my morning. And, I think I went and like told Darren and the kids like, hey, we should be praying for grandpa, but, we're still going to go to church. And I can't remember if I was like on nursery duty or something like that. I want to say that once I got another phone call a little bit later that it was like I had to cancel. I know I didn't end up going to church.
Right. Yeah, you did.
So I think there was another call where it was like, no, actually come to the hospital.
Yeah.
So
Do you remember if Darren had? Because I know he often gets there before you. Because I feel like I remember him being
I
there to
think
tell me. Somebody told me about it.
yeah, and
Maybe
those
he
are
texted or something, but yeah.
events are like those are like the fuzzy things that I'm like, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Did I have to call Darren back from church? Like, was he
Right.
there early and
Right.
I had to call him back? Or
Yeah.
I don't think we went. But I think there was another phone call that was like, hey, like come to the hospital.
Okay.
So
From who? Remember? Was it your sister?
maybe my sister or my mom, I don't.
Yeah.
Those like
It's
details
understandable.
are fuzzy.
That's yeah.
It was just, I know we didn't go to church and we did end up going to the hospital. And I remember we parked and we came in through the emergency room entrance and my mom's best friend was there. And I remember the ER like waiting room just being like ghost town. Like
Yeah.
when you go to the ER, there's like, it's like
right.
crazy. You're waiting and stuff, but like coming as a visitor and coming through that way, I just remember like it was empty. And
And this
my
was
kids,
very close to Christmas, but it wasn't.
2 days before
Yeah,
Christmas.
so it was
So
like
this
the
is
last,
Christmas Eve,
yeah, so
Eve,
that
the
could have been
morning.
part of it. It's like holidays, people try hard.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure your sister is sad that they all come after.
Yes. So maybe that was part of it, but I just remember it being kind of empty and the like light streaming in through the big windows there. And my mom's best friend was sitting in there and she's like, "Oh, I'll let the kids stay with me so you can go in."
Yeah.
And then one of the pastors at Valley Chapel, where my mom attends,
Yeah.
came out to meet us. And that was the moment, because at this point, it's still like, oh, just come to the hospital. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't really know, like maybe
Yeah.
things are worse or whatever. But at that moment, there was something about the look on Josh's face, the solemnness in the way that he was coming to me, and my heart just sank. And I
Was
was
Josh
just
Howard
like,
or
Josh
yeah,
Howard. And I was just like, oh, like I know him well enough to know if there's a look on his face,
Yeah.
like that's not a good look. So he kind of like was like escorting Darren and I into like one of those like family meeting rooms that's
Yep.
like off
Yep.
the
I've
one of the
unfortunately
halls.
been
Yeah,
there.
I'm sure you've been in there.
Yeah.
So we got escorted in there. I just remember like the door opening and just seeing everybody else bawling, and then just I don't even remember like even any details there of just who told me. I just remember
You just
like
knew.
yeah, you just kind of like
He had already died.
he had already passed.
Okay.
Yeah. So by
Did
the time
anybody get a chance to see him? Like your sister, she went sooner, or did he die pretty much on the
I
way?
don't think so.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was my experience, like just right up to the moment of me getting the news. And then it was like we were allowed to go in the back room and, you know, he was there. He was still in his
You did get a
bathrobe.
chance to see him.
Yeah.
What was?
And it was still pretty new. So
Yeah.
like, you know, maybe his skin was a little cold that it was like it had
Yeah.
just happened that morning. So there wasn't anything like traumatic looking about him. He just looked very peaceful, still in his bathrobe from that
Right.
morning.
Right.
Like just, yeah.
Yeah. So what was? Are you glad you did that, or do you?
Oh,
kinda-
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like that's definitely, I feel like an important part of like closure, like actually getting to like,
Especially when it's that sudden. The last you saw him,
Yeah.
everything's fine. Talk to him.
yeah, it's just so weird. Like you're in this cold, sterile room and he's like in his bathrobe. So it wasn't even like he was in a
Mm.
Johnny or like, you know, it was like there was nothing connected to him. He was just laid out on a table. And so I was able to just like, you know, actually like touch his body and hug his face and,
Yeah.
you know, like touch him and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
at that moment, it's still okay to do that. like
Yeah.
you said. Yeah.
So that's why I'm in some ways, I'm glad that I got to do that, as weird as it is.
Yeah, some people would rather, it's so traumatic that it's almost like, was that a healthy thing? And it really comes down to the person.
My preferences, I'm really, really glad that I got to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because by the time it's like a casket, then they don't look like themselves. Like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So do you, that initial, and again, it might be hard to remember because I know you and you've got a servant's heart and you're always like, all right, I got to like help other people.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of
Yeah.
how you know, was that your first instinct? My mom, my siblings, or were you already just kind of like, I can't process it myself?
Yeah. I think it was probably mostly like my mom. Like for us, that was the hardest thing. But
Yeah.
I mean, my mom was just in such shock. She was in more shock, I think, than any of us. Like it was almost like, yeah, like not even crying, just kind of staring off into space, like just
Yeah.
in another world, you know, like the reality wasn't
Yeah.
sinking in at all.
Understandable.
And I remember then at this point, you know, like once we had gotten the news, it was like, okay, now we got to go back to the waiting room and get my kids and bring them in and
Right.
tell them the news.
Right.
And I don't remember how I said it. I just like, I don't think I said it clearly. I think I said something along the lines of like, Grandpa's no longer with us, or, you know, here I was trying to soften the blow
They
and I
sent him to a
just,
different hospital?
I wasn't being direct. And I have a little bit of a memory of like the kids kind of being like, so what is, you know, like, what does that mean? And me like trying
Yeah,
to
'cause, I mean, if it was 6 years ago, so obviously Catherine was around 12, but
yeah.
so they're
Yeah.
young.
And Avery was 6.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do remember that kind of looking back and being like, oh, I wasn't, you know, who's prepared to like tell their kids? Like, it's just in the moment, I don't even know. I probably should have had somebody else like do it, but I'm trying to like,
Well, yeah, they're your kids.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had never dealt with anything like that before.
Right.
Darren's grandmother hadn't passed away yet. So they hadn't had anybody close to them. This was my first real experience with somebody close to me. So
And they
yeah,
don't-
trying to figure out the right way to do that.
kids that age, they have a hard time just, what do I do? Like processing that,
Yeah.
you know? Because I remember when we told Nathan and Grace when my mom died, we weren't at a hospital because my mom's 2 hours away. So we never saw her, but it was at our house and it was like, sorry, we got to sit him down. And Nathan was a little older. It was probably similar, but Grace was pretty young. And it was like, they just kind of sat there. They didn't really know what to
Yeah,
say. You know?
yeah.
You got to tell them, but.
Right. And I think what was different for my kids is that they were in a room with all of their other closest family,
Right.
and everybody's crying,
Everyone's crying.
and comforting each other and that kind of thing. So they just walked in, like I walked into a room of grief. Like I think I might have been the last sibling, or maybe my brother Steve was the last one to come in. But like I think my brother Dave and my sister was, and their families were already there. Like their cousins were already in there
that,
crying.
You almost catch that a little bit, even if you're not sure how to process, but everybody else is upset, including
yeah. How do you not just
feel horrible, regardless if you don't quite know why, you know? I mean, you do, you know, your grandfather died, but, you know, when you're really young, like especially with Avery, it's hard to understand what that means. Yeah.
I'm able to get into that too, but part of it was like wanting to make sure that like she kept remembering him, you know, because when she was 6, she had a lot of memories with him, and, you know, they were close, but
it's something that
not as much.
Not many of us remember too many things from the first 6 years of our life. It's just very vague stuff. It is. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is for me, that was the hardest part. Not necessarily them remembering, but just thinking of all of the things that my mom would have been there for. Right. Like all the different things. And it's so hard.
And you guys probably still do that. Yes, we do that all the time. Like, oh, if only Grandpa was here. Like, he has a whole set of grandkids he just never met. Like, just, it sucks.
Yeah, it does, man. All right, so you obviously didn't. So you found out the backstory of your dad, of how it all happened. What, you know, at some point your mom or whoever you discussed it.
Yeah,
it was a pretty interesting story. It was like, if I remember, he was reading his Bible or something like that.
So it was early enough in the morning that this is my dad's routine. He gets up every morning. He sits at the kitchen island. He's got his Bible laid out. He's drinking his coffee.
Yep.
And it must have been, somewhere in the middle of that. And my mom was up too. So it wasn't like crack of dawn, but they were up. They were doing their morning routine and whatever.
Right. They were obviously at church themselves. So
they would have been. Yeah. So they were getting ready for church in the morning too. So this had all happened earlier, where my dad's still in his bathrobe, and he's sitting at the counter drinking his morning coffee.
Makes me think about what I wear when I do my devotions.
Right? Yeah. Reading the Bible. And so the way my parents' house is situated, it's like a log cabin, and there's a second story in the back, but not in the front. So there's a railing that goes up, and you can kind of look down into the front living room.
Okay.
So something must happen where my dad just maybe started to not feel so great, and went and lay down. And I think he might have told my mom too, like, I'm not really feeling really good, and went to go lay down on the couch. Well, the couch is like right down at the bottom where the railing can look down. So my mom is up there, and the bathroom is right there. So she's upstairs, she's getting ready. She's, whatever, in the bathroom or getting ready. And I think she like heard my dad making some like strange noises, like, I don't know if he was like choking, making choking noises or something. Or like, there was some sort of noises that really startled her.
Yeah.
And that's when she looked down, and, whatever it was that she saw was just like something was not right. Like, I don't know if he was convulsing or, eyes rolling. I don't remember all the details, but definitely there were physical things that really alarmed her.
Yeah.
And at that point she called 911. And I think, I don't know what they did there at the house, but I think I don't remember if it was unclear whether he maybe had already passed at the house, or maybe something happened on the way there. But I have a feeling by the time she reconnected with him at the hospital he was already gone.
Yeah.
And there was nothing that they could have done. So
they tried to work on someone for a while. I think the same thing happened to my mom. She made it to the hospital, but it was very similar.
Yeah.
I think they worked on her at the hospital, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And I don't remember all of the details, but I want to say that I think my mom might have some regrets about, did she call soon enough, or should she have tried something? With her being there, she has a lot more trauma around her experience, kind of seeing it and watching things happen.
How do you
trying to make the right decision?
How do you talk to her about that, like from
I
perspective?
know. Yeah,
because you want to just be like, that is ridiculous.
Exactly.
But you gotta understand that it isn't.
I think now she's at a point where she just knows, like, hey, that was his time. I don't think it too long, but I know I'm pretty sure there were probably times where she second guessed, could I have done something?
Yeah.
Could I have done that differently? Where is it my fault?
Because it's like, I know my mom felt nauseous, but it just, you're not like, I don't know. You tell me you feel nauseous, I'm going to think, oh, you're probably having a heart attack.
Exactly. There was no reason to think that there was anything.
If it was like my arm's numb and I'm feeling chest pain.
Yeah.
No
classic
like
signs.
No.
And even afterwards, it was like, they were like, we think he had a heart attack. It never was even really like 100% sure. They were like, we could do an autopsy. And we're like, we don't need to know exactly. There's
pretty obvious.
Unless there's some like genetic things we need to be aware of. And I think they had ruled that out too. But
So I mean, it's,
We just rest in that it was his time, and
yeah.
that's probably what it was. And
Yeah. What a time though. Like you're reading your Bible, you're getting ready for church. And
yeah,
I mean, it's a good time.
that's kind of how I feel. That I was like, you know what? Like, yeah,
Was he reading something specific from Matthew?
it was in Matthew. It's so funny that you remember that because I was actually going through my photos because I definitely took a photo because I mean,
Yeah.
this was the last thing Dad did. Was here it is right here.
Yeah.
There's like evidence of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And yeah, he had some little devotional thing that he was doing. And it's funny, as I was going back, kind of preparing for today and reading that, there was nothing in particular that stood out about it. Like, whoa, Dad read that right before.
Be ready, you know.
Yeah, there was nothing in there. It was just him just doing his daily
Well,
thing.
that's almost, yeah. There's some beauty in that because you're like, it was just this consistent approach.
Yeah.
Of being God's word.
Yeah.
And sometimes.
And I think that was a gift to us just to see that. Like any other day, he would have packed it up and it would have been gone. I mean, my mom knows, we know that that's his routine.
Of course.
But
that's a story.
That sat there for weeks.
Of course.
My mom rifled through and took some things out and things like that. There were some, good things we found in there, but yeah.
That's
kind of, there's something comforting about.
Right.
About
not
that.
just, people say, oh, I'm pretty sure they were a believer, but it's just like, not that reading your Bible in the morning makes you a believer, but it's a great indicator.
Yeah.
Especially when you do it
better things,
every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we struggle to do it in the first place,
Exactly.
who's going to do that?
Exactly.
There's nothing in it.
So it's just kind of a great legacy. Well, it could be a lot worse ways to have people remember.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So what happened next? Like, you have to, at some point you have to leave the hospital. Was that hard? Like maybe for your mom?
I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely for all of us. It was like, when do you feel you've had enough of that time with him? Right. Like when is enough? And yeah, it's funny. I really don't have, that's kind of vague for me. Like I don't really remember. I remember very vividly being in the room with him, and, getting to kind of hug him and touch him and hold him and talk to him. But not really. I don't really remember leaving the hospital that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the days after.
That can be hard. You almost feel like you're abandoning him, even though you're not. But
I think we all went back to my mom's house. Because then it's like, okay, we got to start making plans. I think we all gathered back.
And call a funeral home, and they picked him up at some point, I'm sure, from the hospital.
Yeah, that all happened, and then
which is good. Yeah, because if someone dies at home, you got to kind of watch that too.
Right.
It's tough.
Right.
But what was it like when you walked into the house? His stuff's everywhere. His Bible's sitting there.
Right.
Stuff's everywhere. Smell is aftershave. Whatever is.
Yeah.
Do you remember what that was like?
We all came back. So, my whole family's local. So we were all together at the hospital, and we all were just like, hey, let's all go back to Mom and Dad's house. Let's gather. I remember there were pastors coming.
Yeah.
So like Pastor Bob and Pastor Josh had come and met us there, and they were just there to counsel us and talk with us and memories and all that kind of stuff. And it was like, okay, we got to start just what's next, right?
Yeah.
It's making some plans, and they kind of I just remember them kind of walking us through that. Now here it is, it's Christmas Eve. So you're trying to be like planning, a service and all this stuff. And, do I have all my gifts? How are they wrapped? You're trying to I've got young kids, we're all trying to do Christmas and mourn my dad at the same time.
Yeah.
And that was a little tricky.
Yeah, with little kids. That's,
if
it was now, not that you wouldn't still be, but you could probably be like, hey guys, maybe next week Christmas, but you can't do that with a 6-year-old,
And we did. I mean, I think in some ways that helped. It was a good distraction.
Yeah.
And it was just another excuse to all be together, so it's like we had that time carved out in some ways. It was kind of nice because, people on Christmas break from school. My sister's a nurse. She was on Christmas. I think if she was working then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it just kind of worked out for us to have that downtime to all be together. It was kind of a gift.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So that must have been really tough though. You kind of have to help sort through the stuff and.
Yeah. And I mean, it took my mom a long time, but, those kind of days after were in some ways a blur, but in some ways memorable because it was Christmas. And so there were certain things about that first holiday without him that really stood out because it was so fresh.
Does that make this time of year harder? I mean, it's 6 years now. Maybe it's a little less so, but is there memories that get associated or?
It's funny that it's positive and negative. I mean, not that it's positive, but like I think I just have positive memories of us being together and just like, I feel like my siblings are all pretty close anyways. We've,
Hmm.
just, we have good relationship with each other, but I
Hmm.
just felt like that brought us even closer because, you're pulling out all the photos and the memories and you're trying to put together those,
Yeah.
the photo collages and just the time that we all spent poring over those things and reminiscing and all that
Mm.
kind of stuff was just really good. And having that downtime to do it versus feeling rushed.
Right. And people already probably, like you said, had some time off or easy to
Yeah.
take the time off.
Yeah. So I feel like I have really positive memories of our of time together and kind of bonding about things like that. Or,
Well, that's
um,
an important thing to point out because, what I've noticed is being through it a lot with different
mm,
families, not just in the church, but outside, who I don't know as well, is it brings you closer. It can really divide people.
right.
And you've seen that too, because you've done
Right.
ministry. You've
There's
seen,
nobody wondering who's going to get this and that. That
yeah.
who cares about?
But
Nobody
even
cares
that, it
about
just
stuff like
becomes
that.
this weird, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
like, what's the service going to be like? And just kind of fighting over stupid stuff.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that, yeah,
It probably
that
just
helped that
kind of,
two of my siblings went to his church,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
it
But it
just,
exasperates what's probably already there.
hmm
So for you, you were already close. It
hmm
made you closer. But if
hmm
someone's already got a bunch of strife and
yeah,
there's selfishness going on,
right.
but I try to tell families it is an opportunity
hmm
to where God can bring you closer. You can start to really say,
That's
what actually matters?
right. And that's what I found. Like, so I have positive memories of that.
Mm.
Um, the way that Christmas works in my family is the adults all like pick a name and we
Yep.
just give for one person.
Yep.
And my dad had me that year.
Oh,
So that was like hard, but also kind of like an extra gift that
because he
like
had already
I was
gotten you what he was.
yeah, he had already
Yeah.
picked out a gift for me. He already had it wrapped and everything.
Mm.
So hard to receive a gift from him
Mm.
that Christmas
Yeah.
when he wasn't there to give it to me,
But really
but
beautiful
also
too.
like just yeah, really like special and healing to be like I got to get a gift from dad that year.
Yeah.
Like my last gift
Yeah. It's
from
almost
him.
like he was there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's something you hadn't, it's not just a memory, it's a new
Right.
thing, which you
Right.
don't
A new
get.
thing. And oh yeah. And I'm like, it was a very unique bracelet. I remember him asking, because you'd always be like, what do you want?
Yeah.
What do I pick out for my adult daughter?
I
And
know.
so
I
I
know.
told him some specific things that I wanted. And one of them was a very specific bracelet somewhere. And he went out or like, these kind. And he went out and he picked one out. So
Yeah.
it's like, I still didn't know exactly what it was going to be. I didn't even know if that's what he was going to get. So I was definitely surprised by it. But
Right.
especially even for like a daughter to have a piece of jewelry, like that's something
Sure.
special. It
Something you can
wasn't like
keep. It's not like
a
something that,
candle or,
yeah,
whatever. It wasn't
something that has
something.
or a shelf life,
Yeah.
even a piece of
Yeah.
clothing, you could keep it, but
Right.
it's
But yeah,
unique.
something like jewelry that it can kind of last is,
Yeah.
really nice. And, just even his handwriting on the little card, little gift wrap or whatever. So,
Yeah. That's great.
so like
That's,
those are positive things that stand out to me. I just remember us having really close time together and just being able to receive a gift from him that
mm.
year.
So those first couple of days, you're all, well, certainly you do, your mom, dad, your
Hmm
siblings, you have strong faith, right?
hmm
So it's not like it's going to make you stop believing in God or anything
Right.
like that. But what
Right.
what do you remember about that? Was it kind of numb or was like just praying constantly or what was it like?
It's funny because I do.
Because I ask this question all the time, so you
Yeah.
were ready
Yeah.
for
No. Yeah. I was definitely thinking about it
it.
that like I know I never once questioned
No,
like
no.
why did you do this,
The
God?
last thing your father would want you to do.
Yeah, yeah. I just remember right off the bat being like, okay, it
Right.
was his time.
Yeah.
It was his time, and I'm accepting that and not ever doubting that God is good or why would you allow us to go through this? Or I think, the hardest part of all of it, I think, was just for my mom and watching my mom go through the grief and supporting her in her grief. And of course, me, yeah, I lost my dad. Like that really sucks. But I never I never feel like remembered feeling angry at God or
Mm.
yeah, or questioning why or
It was just like, well,
just
this is a really hard
yeah,
thing.
crying because you miss him, but not ever feeling angry
Yeah.
or why now
Mm.
or yeah, just
Yeah, it's
in a
funny.
weird accepting way, just being like the Lord gives and he takes away and this is his
Mm.
timing. He had my dad's life
Yeah.
written out. This was his ending day from the
Yeah.
beginning of
Well,
time.
that's also kind of your personality,
Yeah.
which is fine.
Right.
Do you remember, not that you should ever speak for anyone, but your siblings, was there any other, like, did they have different emotions?
I
And your
think
mom
so.
too?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Certainly, I'm sure my
Not
mom
necessarily angry
just,
with God, but just like a little
yeah.
less matter of fact about it than maybe you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely more emotion. Yeah. Yeah. I am just not a very emotional person, but I think I don't think my youngest brother would mind me saying this,
Yeah.
but I think he, there was the three of us. It was me, my brother Steve, and my sister Christine. We're all boom, 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 3 kids in 3 years.
Yeah. He's a surprise
9 years
child.
later, my brother Dave came along.
Yeah.
So we all have core memories that he's not a part of. And
Mm,
he has all these years. We were all moved up and out of the house.
right.
And he had a lot of years. And he also got like married and moved out on his own later. Well, he moved out before I got married, but he
Yeah.
had more years as a young adult at home with my parents too.
Right.
So he just had this whole long period of time where it was like him and my mom and my dad.
Right.
And he and my
Almost
dad
only
did all
childish.
sorts of
Yeah.
things together. They did Boy Scout stuff together. They'd all go on these hikes. He'd do hikes
Yeah.
together. He just has all these memories, and it was closer for him. Like I got busy with my life. I got married and had kids, and started doing the stuff. Dave's still there with dad every day doing stuff, and
Yeah.
so I think it was harder for him because he had more closer time with my dad
Right.
more recently.
Right. That makes
And
sense.
so, yeah, I think that was hard for me to see him, my
Yeah.
younger brother really missing that. And
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned your mom, and I remember thinking, when my mom died, going through that process, I was like really somewhat pretty thankful that it was her and not my dad. And I was actually, I'm close to both my parents, but I was closer to
Yeah.
my mom.
yeah,
Grew closer to my dad after losing my
Right.
mom, but my dad was just such a rock. Like he allowed us to just grieve and not worry about him, even though we probably should have, right? But it's just his personality, right?
Right.
Whereas my mom, love her dearly, but she was not a rock.
right.
So we would have had
Right.
to deal more and I think that's pretty typical. Not
Yeah.
always. Sometimes
Yeah.
the woman's the rock, but often you're like,
Mhm.
boy, it's harder for a woman to lose her husband and
Yes.
vice versa.
Yeah.
When it's a close marriage and close
Right.
relationship,
Yeah.
And not that your mom has done great, but it's like it's hard. It
It is
so
hard. Right. Yeah.
emotional.
And sometimes like knowing how I am, in some ways I'm like, okay, I'm glad I can be here and not be falling apart
Yeah.
while you're falling apart. So I can be here to be like, not throw out platitudes, but, remind you of what's true and just be,
Right.
like be here for you.
Yeah.
But other times then I'm like, gosh, I wish, like, it's funny. I was going back through my journal and stuff and it was like, I wish I was grieving more. It's like there's times where even in the very first few
Did you feel
days,
guilty at all?
oh yeah, it was weird because it's
What's
like
wrong with
I'm
me?
really sad. I'm really sad, and I definitely had
Of
like
course.
it's like I definitely have me writing about like very soon after it died, just crying myself to sleep, and like that
Sure.
happened a lot.
Yeah.
But there were other times where I remember being like, I feel like everybody else is feeling a little more sad than I am right now, or showing it a little bit more,
Like
and
it's a
maybe I
competition.
should too. Yeah,
Well, brings out a very important topic of grief.
yes.
Is that I tell people all the time, there's no rules.
There are no rules.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
grief's hard
remember-
enough. Don't put rules on it.
Seriously. And I remember like, and you can probably experience it too, like you start to feel it building,
Yeah,
like there's some emotions building, but life is busy and I don't have time to cry and I don't have, like I just need to keep going. And I remember kind of feeling it building up over like a few days and me being like, Thursday, I'm like looking at the calendar. Thursday is going to be the day. I'm going to just let the dam break. Like I'm going to plan that Thursday.
Sit down and sob.
Yeah, like I'm just going to have a cry fest on Thursday. I can tell I need one. Oh no.
Yeah, Thursday gets a lot of
Tuesday and
pressure.
Wednesday came along and
Oh yeah, he was
the
before
dam broke
Thursday.
and I was like,
Yeah.
who do I think I am planning my grief? Like on Thursday we'll cry.
Yeah. Wow, I never heard that one.
All the good and bad things about my personality that I'm like, who do you think you are, Hailey? That
God's
like,
like, I'm gonna need to do that.
exactly. Yeah. So things like that where I was like, I have no idea. I have no idea how to do this. Just cry when you need to cry. Don't try to plan it.
Exactly, and that's something that I feel like I tell people all the time. They're going
Mm-hmm.
through grief. Is that they put so much pressure on themselves about like I should be sad right now, or
Right.
I shouldn't ever laugh. And I'm like, I always try to point back to, especially if you had a good relationship with the
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
what would they want?
Yeah.
They wouldn't want you to not be sad. You're
Right.
gone, but they want you to laugh.
Yeah. I don't think I've had guilt about laughing or being happy, but definitely
But
like
yeah, some people do.
maybe I should be, more emotional or sad. I can't.
You are who you
like
are.
you say, Jamie, I'm like this person. That's
God
right.
knew what kind of wife that Darren needed.
Exactly.
If you were emotional, you would have
Nobody
died
else.
long ago.
Exactly. So things were a laugh. Maybe a little
so
too
you
much.
felt like at times you were just like,
wishing I could be a little
yeah.
more distraught.
But like you said, God used it for you to be that kind
Yeah,
of
that I
rock
could
at
be a little
times.
stronger for other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember thinking the same thing with my kids too. Like, I don't know who's crying at night without me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how they're grieving, and having to help your kids through that. And like, aren't you going to be sadder? Or maybe you have been sadder. I don't know, but it's the same thing. Like, not expecting them to grieve in a certain way and just letting them, letting them do what they need to do, but knowing that we're here to talk and bring up memories.
They're complicated creatures,
Yeah.
They're human beings. I remember when I had Grace Brown on about her brother, and she talked about, I forget which daughter. One daughter was holding Desmond like Uncle Geordie did him. And I was like,
yeah, seriously. Right.
It's like, man.
I do remember trying to tell my kids, like, write down some memories, like get some things right on paper now, because you're going to be older and you might not remember. And so if there are certain memories that you have of grandpa, like put those somewhere.
Yeah, that's really
because
smart.
that's a way to like.
That's really good advice for
kinda
people
keep
who
it
have
alive.
kids to like write some things down.
Yeah.
If you think you're gonna remember. Oh.
No, and so we'd go through pictures, and I loved over the next few years, I was being, look at this picture of you and grandpa, like as a, don't forget, like, I hope you never forget this memory. Like, I hope, I'm sure.
Did you ever feel, and I know that it's not Christian-like to feel this way, but did you ever feel a bit, robbed is the wrong word.
No, I know what you're
But you ever feel,
saying.
because your dad was a great guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he just was. And not just a strong believer, but he was a great guy.
Yeah.
And to know him was just, what a great guy. So, like, I just remember with my mom, like, I would run into certain people and just be like, why are you still here? I felt terrible about that. But I'm like, why did God leave you?
Yeah.
Like, you don't do anything for this
Right.
world.
I'm thinking, like, all the people he still could have served and all the relationship he could have had with, like, my youngest brother's kids. Like, that's probably one of the biggest things. And I'm like, and
then you run into some cranky guy with nobody likes, and you're just like,
yeah, there's definitely a part of that. And then there's like, there was just so many verses I've come across that I was like he got to not have to deal with life here on earth. Like, what a blessing for him.
That's
like,
true.
he didn't have to go through COVID. Like, he didn't.
Yeah.
He just, he got to just not be
say,
here anymore.
If you could send him an email that says, hey, you can come back, he'd be like, sorry, I'll see you.
Absolutely not.
I'll see you when you
Right. That's just the perspective I've had to take, is like, hey, he got the blessing of just not having to be here
God
anymore.
has a reason. Some of it was to protect him. Some of it was, who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that point, you now have to, I'm trying to remember. So obviously the service was after Christmas, but was it like soon after? Did you just do like a week later? I can't remember if he was cremated or buried.
He was buried.
So it would have been soon. They're usually, they can hold it off a certain amount of time.
Yeah. And I want to say it was, sometime within that week.
I remember it was winter, but that would have been any time after. But so you're going through Christmas, but you're also planning a service, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What was that like? There was a lot of.
It's funny because it didn't seem to take very long. I do remember me and my siblings and my mom all being like at the funeral home and talking with them, and we made very quick decisions, and that was that. We were gonna do it. And then it was definitely like right after the holiday, like right after Christmas, that we had the calling hours and funeral, and then that was all wrapped up before New Year's.
Yeah. What do you remember about the funeral? Obviously, it was at the church. There was a huge amount of people there.
Yeah, I remember the calling hours being like such a huge blessing.
Yeah.
And how I felt about that is related to me. A lot of the, I don't want to say regrets, but like having gone all through that myself, and how blessed I was with every single person that came through that line. Every single person that came through that line was extremely meaningful to me. People poured out of his office, people I'd never even met before from work, coming and telling, just, anybody that he had touched. There was like a line outside to even get into the inside line. I don't even know. Like, there was just so many people, like 4 hours nonstop. But just the blessing that it was, hearing how many people he touched, and it was very comforting.
Yeah.
That I remember after that looking back and being like, I had no idea how important that is for me to go and other people.
Yeah.
Like if I knew somebody really well or if it was convenient for me, I would go.
Well,
But
because
I
it's a
didn't.
very awkward situation to go to
Yeah.
a wake, to
Yeah.
be on the other side of it, because especially when you're not super close to
Right.
everybody.
Right.
Like I've always said, man, they should probably like have, but that's probably an argument against what I'm always like, you should almost put the family in stations because sometimes it's like I know one person.
Well, exactly. And I'm like, okay, like you're in line and you're like, okay, what
But
do I say
then
to these
the
people that I
people
don't know?
who worked with your dad may not have said anything to you. They would have went to your mom or something.
They did.
But because there was a line, so you got a
Right.
chance to experience that.
Yeah. And I think that's what I didn't realize is that even if all you did was come through and just hold my hand and say, I'm so sorry.
And he mattered enough for me to show up.
Yes.
I loved your dad. I loved your dad.
Yeah.
And
just the fact that you came through the line and you just, I don't care what you said. It didn't even matter. It's just that the fact that you were there, people being there mattered. Yeah. And I didn't realize how much that matters.
Yeah. That's really
until
good advice.
Afterwards, because I was just like, man, like I just looked back and I was like, I was a really bad friend to a lot of people who went through grief. Like I would even think of yours. I was like, I didn't go to your mom. Your mom's services were out in the Berkshires. And I just remember being like, oh, that's kind of far. What am I going to do with the kids? Yeah, I think I'll sit this one out. And then afterwards being like, that was horrible of me. Like I was just ignorant, really ignorant.
But you probably also
important it
learned,
was.
like, there's probably people who didn't go and you're not angry with them.
Yeah, I guess you don't realize who's not there because you just focus on the
or you
ones that
do,
are.
and it's like you don't want to feel guilty about that, but at the same time, it's a great lesson for moving forward.
That was one of my biggest takeaways after all of this was like, if there's any way I can go, I will go.
Yeah.
If I know you, I will be there. I will go through the
avoid those
calling
like the
hours if I
plague.
can. Can't always make the funeral too, you know what I mean? But I'll go somewhere, do what I can.
Yeah.
Where before it was just
a
like
lot
only
of
if it's
people aren't doing
convenient.
calling hours anymore. It seems to
I've
be.
noticed that.
Yeah. And I think they think of it that way. So like at least a service is like, okay, we're like talking about but like that just seems like
But
hard.
I'd rather, sometimes it's like, oh, I can't take the time out of my schedule to go to somebody's whole celebration of life, but I can take 20 minutes to go through the line. I wish, there's a lot of people I wish I could do that, and they just aren't doing it.
Yeah.
So,
Some people do nothing.
yeah, I think that really, people don't realize how they're being robbed. Of a really, at least for me, it was a very comforting experience.
I think it's, again, there's no rules to it. It's not like you're sinning or anything, but I think it's a real big mistake. I think the word closure is wrong, but it's
honoring.
It's honoring, and it's part of the process.
It is.
Of walking through it.
It is.
If you don't, it always feels like there's like that. That's why they're very emotional. It's some people that I'll see they're doing great, and they come the time of the celebration of life that they're a mess, and it feels final, and that's really hard, but it's really important.
There is something about the connection that you make, and there's people that come through, and I'm like, oh, I don't know you. Thanks. You work with my dad. Thanks for being here. That's great. And there's other people like, you're a good friend of mine. Like,
thank you.
That strengthens our friendship because you were there for me,
of course.
and to give somebody else the opportunity to do that. Like we need that.
Yeah.
We need that hug. We need that connection. Like you took time out of your busy schedule to be here for me. That means something.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a way of strengthening relationships, just being unselfish, like it takes sacrifice to go because it's time out of your schedule. It's time out of your day. It's you're going to feel uncomfortable.
That time of year for you. I mean, Christmas had passed, but it's kind of that week between Christmas and New Year's, and a lot going on.
Yeah. So I just thought that.
What do you remember about the funeral at the church? Again, it was at Valley Chapel, which is a huge sanctuary. And it was pretty full. I mean, most of those pews were taken.
A lot of people.
Yeah. Do you remember? Was it numbing? Because again, now you're not just talking to people; you're kind of sitting through.
So that's
speaking and all that kind of.
I remember planning it, and again because Valley Chapel is another gospel preaching church, so I just remember as we were all planning that, it was like, Pastor Bob was saying that he definitely wanted. We were all saying that, like, we want to make sure that the gospel goes out.
Your dad would have been very
so like looking at it that way and thinking of like, okay, what unsaved friends and family will be here, thinking of it that way, but also just wanting it to be God glorifying, basically. That like, yes, it's a way to honor my dad, but what is it about my dad that is going to roll up into glorifying God? So both my brothers were like no, not gonna talk. Like they gave us things to say, and my sister and I both took turns, and
Mm-hmm.
I think my mom did speak a little bit.
Yeah.
I honestly can't remember that, but I remember like, you know, I wanted to, but I didn't know what I was gonna say.
Darren spoke, right? Darren
He
spoke?
did.
Yeah.
Yes.
He did.
Yes,
Yeah.
he did.
Yeah, he did a good job.
That's right.
Shockingly.
Mm-hmm.
No, just kidding.
Yeah. But I remember like
Yeah.
that time coming, like, and just being like, okay, I need to say something, but I don't know what I'm going to like.
Well, that's a tough
What am I
spot.
going to say?
That's a tough spot for a lot of reasons, but
Yeah.
especially in that case, because, you know, I'll do funerals where it's like 20, 30 people there, and it's at a funeral home.
Mm-hmm.
It's still really hard because of the emotion piece. But the
Right.
public speaking piece, and again, you're pretty good. You teach. You're not like someone who's terrified to speak.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of people.
It is.
It's a
It
big
is.
place. And now you put, I'm super emotional.
Right.
Well, and for you.
Right.
Um,
Right.
And then the hardest part was for my mom, because those two things, like public speaking is not a problem for me,
Right.
obviously. But it was one of the hardest things because it's like, I have too much. I don't know what to say. Right.
Right.
It almost seemed like,
I can't do him justice.
yeah.
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 Yeah. So it was one of those things where I was like, I know I can do it. I know I can stand up in front of a room and I'm not going to fall apart. And I'm not scared to death to be up here, but I don't know what I'm supposed to say. And totally trusting
He's
God.
so awesome.
Yeah, like, okay, God, you're going to have to give me something, and just trusting that he would give me the right thing to say. But another day would go by and another day, whatever. Like it would get closer and closer.
Yeah.
And I remember
too.
So that was Christmas Eve when he passed away.
Mm.
Christmas Eve is probably when we're like making arrangements and things like that.
Mm.
And my mom was just like, she didn't want to be at home alone. She's always had somebody there with her and in her grief. And so we were going to take turns to like sleep at mom's house. So I said, I'll take Christmas Eve. I'll sleep at mom's Christmas Eve. I'll wake up at mom's Christmas morning.
Mm.
And, have breakfast for whatever and make my family wait. That's fine. Then I'll scoot home. We'll do Christmas together. And then we were all going to be at my sister's later that day.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was, unless it was Christmas Eve or doing that. Anyways, I remember like sleeping in my mom's guest room and just like, just having like an awful time, bawling my eyes out. And it was like midnight or something. And it was like, boom, the inspiration came. So I remember sitting up because I had my notebook and I was like,
Get that down.
just scribbling down ideas of like, okay, I started to just have, what are the main things that are sticking out in my mind about my dad that I want to say? And how am I gonna point this to Christ and things like that. And it was like totally God thing to just in the middle of the night after I just, eyes puffed shut, pile of tissues all over the floor. Like, okay, God's giving it to me right now. And
what a mercy.
Yeah. And it's just like,
there's times when he does that to me and I'm like, oh, why couldn't it always be like this? It's
right.
Like, just wrote itself.
Yeah. So I remember sitting
that
up and taking down some notes. And then it was like, probably the day before, I just remember like, okay, at least I have a starting point and starting to polish it up and putting some things together. And, I came together.
That's another thing. You don't want to get up there and babble.
Right. Right. And I remember us like
not know how to close it off.
Yeah. And like showing what we had like with the rest of the family. So there was a few things in mind and my mom was like, no, I don't want you to mention that or talk about that or things like that. She was just like, I'm like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
So just kind of sharing with each other so we knew where we where we were headed.
And so the day of, it was just exhausting. You get there, it's like
I honestly don't even remember. There probably was like and it's funny because I've been to other funerals there too. And it was funny because I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, was that Cliff's funeral or my dad's funeral? Like I'm picturing things and some of the same people were there. And I'm like, I don't even know. I remember being there. I remember standing up and speaking.
I remember Cliff's mom.
Right.
Yeah. And Cliff had his own spot over there and I kept being worried. Thankfully, no, that wasn't his mom. I can't remember who that was, but it wasn't Cliff's funeral because he was there.
Yeah, there's just been a lot of funerals in the same churches.
I remember Cliff just being there, just being like, "Oh, Cliff, please, just don't give that guy a microphone."
Yeah.
But they did.
Yeah,
God, I miss him.
So I really, I don't know.
Yeah,
sure there were goodies.
But then you had they did the upstairs lunch.
Mm-hmm. I do remember Pastor Bob was pretty new at our church then. I remember like still like. I must have sat down with him or something like that I was like getting to know him and Nita a little bit, even at my dad's. Like he came, but he barely knew me. He didn't know my dad at all.
Yes.
So it's funny, things like that I
that
remember
would have
like
probably been, 2018 then?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's about when he came. And he came right before Christmas too. It was like a couple months before,
Yeah.
I think. That's when he
Yeah, I
started.
remember it
So
being kind of new.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Huh.
yeah, so there's certain things like that that are just the day's a blur.
Oh, such a blur.
Yeah, I do remember it being exhausting. I definitely have more memories of the calling hours and people, very specific people coming through and different conversations that I had with people and stuff
Yeah.
like
Did
that.
you ever did you get so that when the funeral's over, do you ever remember feeling like, all right, the world's starting to move on again? Shit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
yeah, probably the week
Yeah,
after
like, okay, so this is the
kind
new
of people are
normal.
going back to work
And
and
a lot of it was just more, even still, like, I don't want to say the aftermath, but like helping my mom feel like, how do you live now?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like a lot of older couples, they each had their set things that they did.
yeah.
So all the things that my dad did was trying to figure that out with my
Mm-hmm.
mom, like a lot,
Mm-hmm.
he did a lot of the financial stuff and the
Of
bills. And
course. Yeah.
so, Darren and I both walking her through that, like, okay, where you at financially? How you gonna
Yeah.
learn to pay your own bills? And um, just decisions she had to make about, yeah, hey, I might need a new fridge soon, or, decisions
Mm-hmm.
that she would make with my dad
Mm-hmm.
and her learning, just figuring out how to make those on her own or, with our input versus my dad's input and always wanting to do what my dad would have done. Like always considering what would Bob have wanted me to do and us trying to be like, Mom, you can make your own decisions and what
Right.
you would want to do. And
Right. It's fine to
just,
consider that, but don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. You don't
yeah,
ultimately
yeah.
know.
I think that she
Yeah.
still does it a little bit maybe, but yeah, just really helping my mom figure out
Yeah.
where to go from here,
Yeah.
how to put one foot in front of the other. And
But I do remember that being what probably the hardest time for me was the month after
mm-hmm.
the services and stuff like that because it like, oh, I'm supposed to just go back to, and
Yeah.
I distinctly remember the big things were like my family, even the big things of ministry. I didn't have any problem thinking, yeah, it
Mm.
was the little stuff
Yeah.
that I'm like, people went, bang, 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 and I normally have
Yeah, and you
patience
just be
for.
like,
I
this
don't
doesn't
care.
matter in the grand
I
scheme of
don't care.
things, right?
And it's good to like I remember for me, and Darren was one of the best, but the elders being really great about because I didn't have other help at the time when my mom died,
Right.
like associate
Take the
pastor, and
time
I was
that you
just taking some of the
need.
tasks. I'm like, I can't handle
Yeah.
this right now.
Yeah. I think
That
that's part of it. Grief is just exhausting.
yeah,
Even if, even for me as a, not like super emotional person, there's still just an exhaustion to
sure,
it. It's a
because you are
mental,
processing it.
yeah, that's the thing.
It's
It's a
not the
mental
same.
exhaustion. It's an
Yeah,
emotional exhaustion. Even if it's not all coming out, it's there.
yeah.
And so it's just this dull of like, I can't. I just can't do that. And I think what's really cool is just the way the body of Christ comes in and
Sure.
picks you up and takes care of you. And I think that's probably one of the biggest blessings that I look back and see like so much good
Mm.
came out of it in terms of just, yeah, me getting to witness what the body of Christ is supposed to be like and just being really
What do you
blessed.
remember? Anything specific that people did for you that was
Mm,
especially helpful?
food's always a good thing. So
I don't want
I
to cook.
remember the morning after. So here it is, Christmas Eve. And again, it's like a busy time for everybody.
Yeah.
So it was Christmas Eve morning, and the McCourts were just like, we're coming over. It wasn't, do you want us to come over? We're coming over. We're bringing muffins and coffee or whatever from like, and they were just there. And that was like, when we're just still like in shock
Shock.
and
Yeah.
reeling.
Yeah.
And they were, I
It
could
helps
just,
your kids. They kind of,
yeah, it got a little distraction for the kids. And
yeah.
we just sat around my kitchen table, and I was just still like, and like
Yeah.
memories and all the things. And just,
Mm.
that was really, really meaningful. And I think it was those things I look back and I'm like, that really mattered
Yeah.
to have like, okay, the first day is like, it's happening and I'm at the hospital, all that
Sure.
stuff. The next day is I'm
Right.
home.
Yeah, I'm home.
And it's like, oh, wait, we're not meeting with the funeral home till later. It's just, you
Right.
need people.
Yeah.
And they were just there. And so that really, really stands out as a huge memory of just how much that meant to me, that somebody was just right there when it was really uncomfortable. And I'm sure, well, Becky, did you have all your gifts wrapped? And, like, I'm sure she had running around to do, that's a really inconvenient time,
Right.
but they were there and
Yeah.
they stayed for hours and, and it was like, oh, you probably got things to do.
Yeah.
That was really
I
meaningful.
try to tell people now, especially more than ever, it's like just be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just be there.
It doesn't always mean it's your level of relationship you have with the person, right?
Right.
So they're good friends.
Right.
So they bring muffins and they spend time. Not everyone's going to feel comfortable doing
Right.
that, right? But whether it's a text message or whether it's a phone call or whatever it is, be there.
Right.
Because it's awkward because I'm just like, oh, they don't want me in their space.
Right. Meal ministry. Like I know there's people that's their ministry. It's a really important ministry. When you talk about the things you just can't cook. You can't, you can't do things. So to have people just showing up with meals, I still remember, I don't know if it was, my family was all together, like picking out pictures and preparing for the service and things like that at my sister's, or if that was when we were doing Christmas. But I remember it was like getting to be about evening and I knew we had a meal coming, and it was Katie Delano. And we didn't want to go home. So we were like, hey, do you mind making the delivery to my sister's house instead?
Yeah.
These huge trays, epic trays of like steak bomb sandwiches. My whole family will never forget it. It's
She's
like,
Cedia.
oh my gosh. And it was like, she brought enough food for my entire family and whoever else was still hanging out at my sister's house. And we were like, it was like whatever we had done earlier in the day, there had probably been some food, but now it was like the next hunger cycle was coming up and we probably would have already dispersed, except we were all still wanting to be together because we're like fresh in our grief. And it was like, we probably would have had to order pizzas or something, but nope. Katie Delano steps in with like steak bomb sandwiches for everybody. And it was like the best
It's funny
food
how your
I
kids
ever
never
ate.
forgot.
Yeah, we will never forget that.
Katie's the steak bomb woman for them.
Yes. And just the fact that, she was willing to bring it to my sisters. And there was like so much. It was enough to like feed the crowd. That was awesome. I remember even after the meal train was done, I had no dresser. Just one day, I'm bringing you food.
Yeah.
Thank you. Even people that had no business cooking. It was good.
Yeah.
Because it showed that they cared.
Yeah.
So that's what I say. Just do something. And if you're not a cook, do something.
It speaks to, and it's not why we're to be Christ-like to people.
Mm-hmm.
The way you had so much to people leading up to that, because that's just who you are. It's what God, you know what to do. And so I'm not saying this is the reason, but it shows, it's almost like built up, equity. Like, right? Like, and I hate to say that, but if like nobody comes to see you, maybe you're around really bad people, but maybe you just didn't make like there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It kind of, you get to see there's a reason why so many people wanted to do something.
Yeah.
Because you had been a blessing to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a horrible position to be in. You're like, this is terrible. Your father, like, and what do I do? There's nothing that you can do, but there is. You just got to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what I would say. Just the ways that people, the texts and the calls and whatever, but some tangible expression of, I'm here, I'm helping you.
Yeah.
And people would, even sometimes they would just offer, and it was like, oh no, we're good, but like, thanks for the offer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember if there were things like people offering to bring kids rides, or do they want, you want the kids to hang out at our house for a little while. Yeah, things like that, where it was just, think about the reality of their situation and where they might need help or
when somebody's grieving, like some people do try to, like, they're too awkward to press in, and it's like, no, don't be overstep yourself and make it about you, or try to control something, try to preach at them either. Right.
That's, I have to say, I don't have any memories of that, of people trying to preach at me or platitudes. It was just
part of that though is because you dealt with it the way you did. I think there are times where we need someone who's close to us. Again, you earn that hearing. If Becky were to say something to you at some point because you were just wallowing in grief, say, I love you, but remember
I
what
could
God
hear that from.
you would not be like, who does she think she is?
Right.
But she's earned that. She's your friend. You know her character and who she is, and she's not coming in doing that.
Right.
It is okay to cry.
Right.
Like some people are like, you shouldn't be crying. Well, that's silly. Jesus did. So I think I can,
Yeah.
But,
no, that's true.
but there does come a time where some people need to hear just the truth in a loving way. Like you said, you've done with your mom, and that's a good thing. But again, you have the relationship with her to be able to do that.
Right.
And so it's like, that's why I always say, like, don't recede, but like, what is your relationship to that person? And do that.
Right.
And don't shy away.
Right.
They'll tell you if too much.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of people that just asked. Or
What can I
I
do?
think, looking back and just what a blessing it was to see people using their gifts. Grief is an opportunity for people to step in, whatever your gift is, use your gift in that
Yeah.
way. And so I could
Aaron
look
got to
back
preach
and
when my
be,
mom died.
right,
Actually, twice in three
right.
3 weeks. The other one
So
was
you got sick.
sickness.
Right.
It's like the only times that's ever happened was 2
Right.
times out of 3 weeks
Yeah.
where I had to be like, So yeah, he got a chance to use his gift to
And I think it's
allow
humbling
me
for me too, because I
Yeah.
am a person that likes to be the doing for other people and the giving to other people, to be like, oh, I am actually really needy right now. And I'm willing to
Yeah.
help me. I'm here to receive. Like, yes, I'm weak right now. Like that. I
Right.
think that was good.
It's
That was
humbling.
good for me.
But credit to you because that's another thing people make a big mistake, like people please to the end. And it's like, no, people can't bless if you don't let them.
Exactly. And I think I look back and really enjoyed that, just being able to
Yeah.
receive from people and let people bless me in the
Heather
way
always
that
says
they
to me,
wanted
like,
to.
you're really good at accepting blessings. I'm like, yeah, I am.
Exactly. Yeah. It's nice. Yep. Sucky situation,
Yeah.
but nice
I'm
to
not trying
have
to
an
coerce
excuse.
people into blessing
Right.
me.
Nice to have an excuse to be on the recipient of the meal train instead of being
Yeah.
the one giving
And
the meal
like you
train.
said, it felt good,
Yeah.
and you needed to feel good
Right.
in that time.
Right. It's you feel good, you feel loved, but it's just also being like, this is what the body of Christ is supposed to be doing. And just feeling good that like we're doing that, like our church is doing that.
Any advice on what not to do when someone's? I mean, we already covered a few. Covered preaching, probably, and
It's funny, I don't really remember too much of
even if it didn't
anybody
happen
doing
to you,
it,
but
doing
it's
anything
yeah,
wrong.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think to me, being overbearing or under, it's like find that sweet spot of just checking in, and know they want you to check in.
Yeah.
But don't,
Yeah, I think that was nice, was that like, sometimes it's like, okay, the week happens and then it's done.
Yeah.
But still having, like, a card trickle in here and there later, or, somebody checking in on me. Okay, it's been a month, or, whatever, things like that.
I think too, listening, because you do, like you said, even with your kids, like you wanted to talk about them, at least maybe not initially because it was so, like numbing, but then people want to talk. They want to like just tell, even if it's a story that someone might not really care that much about. And in reality, just listen, just show like, you need to talk about him. You need to talk about him. So talk, instead of, I think that can be, I know that was helpful for me, to be able to talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk
Family
about
and
memories.
friends.
And
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you remember, just, was there ever, how long did it take for you to feel like, again, it was never going to be back to normal, but it felt like I'm doing okay?
Man.
See me when that happens?
I know. I don't know. I know. I don't know. I feel like it was just really gradual.
Yeah.
Like I could say, was it a year? I don't know. And I think it's one of those things where I remember expecting certain, like, okay, so his birthday's in January. So it was like about a month after he died, his birthday rolls around. My first birthday without him rolled around. My mom's first Valentine's Day without, there's just certain things like that would roll around that would just, like
now Christmas.
Yeah.
Christmas Eve.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like you get those first anniversaries. I don't remember there being a time where I'm like, okay, things are good now.
It's kind of interesting that this year, if it wasn't for leap year, Sunday would have fallen on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Because Christmas is a Wednesday, but we didn't have it.
Right.
Not that it, but
yeah,
it's
but
Sunday.
If it was,
that would have been interesting.
Yeah.
But you still,
because it's always like the Sunday before or after. I've had there's just certain Sundays where I'm like, it's like, this would be.
Feels it.
Yeah, it feels like that day. Because I'm like, it's a Sunday morning. Maybe the weather's the same. I'm like, I'm not going to church today.
Yeah.
Like,
because that's a very distinct weekend. Not just, obviously it's Christmas, but I mean, from a church standpoint.
Right.
Like it's usually, there's decorated, people are excited. It's not Christmas Eve, of course. That's a whole, but it's still, it's not like a random Sunday in March.
Right. And I remember, I'm trying to think if I went to Christmas Eve service.
You may have went to Valley Chapel with your family. You may have.
I don't know. I feel like I either skipped it because I didn't think I could handle it, or I went and just cried through it.
You're right.
I don't remember. I think
I
I
don't
went.
remember
I think I
what you
went.
did either. I think you probably did. No,
I think I
doubt
went.
you stayed home, but
But I remember like New Year's Eve, we used to always have like a big party and stuff. And I
Yeah.
was like, nope,
yeah.
can't do that. Just
Yeah.
did nothing. Just followed.
Yeah. Because you went back to your mom's house Christmas Eve, you said. Was that the first Christmas Eve?
That was just me. So it was like
Yeah.
at night, like at night, like, so like my
So
kids
she
were
wasn't
probably, like I
alone.
probably put them to bed and made sure I had like everything ready to go. And then I went over to my mom's and
Yeah.
slept there. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So looking back, what do you, again, this question's hard, but what do you think or know that God did do like good in it?
I remember there were so many things that I wish I had written down because we, like my family was overwhelmed with the number of things that we saw good coming out of it.
Yeah.
Shame on me for not having like a written list of them. I just remember like all the time, like even that
you
whole
should
week
be
being
angry
like,
at yourself for not taking those notes.
yeah, like people that would come up to us and just be like, I'm like big decisions that they had made because like your dad impacted me and this just really made me think about it. And I'm doing this now, or I'm not doing this now, or I'm doing this ministry, or, just people that were inspired by him and the life that he lived that wanted to be different.
Yeah.
And doing things that I remember a lot of things like that. And I'm like, I didn't follow up with people, to see if they actually did it, but just that it was a catalyst for people, like a turning point. It was funny. I was reading through one of my journals and I was actually talking with Darren the other day. I was like, no, years ago, I mean, he's always been a sports enthusiast, but he really like kind of simmered down on a lot of things, stopped following a lot of sports people and stuff like that. And I didn't make any connection with it. But in my journal, he had said that it was after everything with my dad and realizing how my dad had spent his time and wasn't wasting his time, that he just felt like this glaring, like, you're wasting so much time on sports. Look at your father-in-law who's like doing all these things and serving people and whatever. And he just felt this like, maybe
Conviction.
like a conviction. And I was like, oh, according to my thing, you stopped following, I had
According to
according to my notes, like that was just like a really thing that had stuck out at me then, that I wrote it down and I had forgotten about that.
Yeah.
And that is something that I was like, oh, I'm really grateful for that. That like, that was a major thing, where Darren kind of made a lifestyle change around that.
How about your own faith? It was already strong, so it's not like you went from a weak Christian to a strong one, but did it, certainly you already mentioned that it's like, make sure you show up. That was really.
Yeah. If anything, I just felt like, okay, here is my chance to prove that I believe the things that I say I believe, like, do I really believe God is sovereign or not? Like, do I believe that this is my dad's time or not? Do I believe that God is good or not? So I think that was what it was for me, is like, I've said these things, but I haven't really had this big storm that's come through my life that shook me up the way this did.
Right.
And this is where the rubber meets the road. So like, I think that was like a big thing for me, was like, okay, I really do believe it. I'm really going to act like I believe it.
That's where the conviction is.
Yeah. Okay. And it's funny because that was one of the things I was thinking about in preparing for today, was like, why did I react the way I am? Other than the fact that I'm just not a super over emotional person, but like, why could I be as strong as I was going through it? And just started thinking about just the way that God had prepared me for it, and just my relationship with him leading up to that, that if my relationship with God, if I didn't know him the way that I knew him, I would be floundering. And just this past week, we had our women's Christmas party and Kelly Trottier spoke. And it was really weird because she was also talking about the time that her father had gotten really sick and had died, and what God had done in her life leading up to that. And what he had done to prepare her for that. And that she had just very, not that long before, really put a stake in the ground, was like, I'm going to get to know God, and I want to know him. I want to love him. I want to trust him. And it really like just made some drastic changes in her life toward that end. And then this came about with her dad, and just talking about the things that she wouldn't have been able to go through if she didn't know who God was. And so I thought a lot about that like, me knowing God, me knowing who he was, me knowing his word, like when the Bible talks about building your life on the rock. I did that,
Right.
and the storm came. But if I had built my life on the sea, like if that happened 10 years earlier, I might have been a little more shaky, you know? Like
Sure.
I can look back at times in my life where I was a little more dry, you know, like
Yeah.
I didn't
Of
have a
course.
really close relationship with God. I was definitely still a Christian, but
Right.
I was
Yeah.
just at a really different point in my life where I was walking with him. Like I had a really strong devotional life. Like I was in the
Mm.
Word, I knew him,
Mm.
and just felt like that came at a time where I was ready for it,
Yeah. That's
and it didn't
something
knock me over.
that can be hard for people. Like when we're in the good seasons, we talk about all the time, like
Right.
you got to stay with it
Yeah.
because, you don't know what it's going to be, but what you do know is something's coming.
Right.
It's life.
Right. And I feel like I've
Someone's
always
gonna
kind of felt
die,
like that like things have been a little too easy
Yeah.
for a long time. Like
Yeah.
at some point the other shoe's going to drop.
Yeah. Life will bring struggle. It will
Exactly.
bring something.
Mm-hmm.
And you build up that. So then you do see if the rubber meets the road, but don't wait. Don't wait.
Right.
And you know what? If it was a drier time, God would have got you through it. It would have drew you closer to him. But I still think that's a really good lesson for people to take from it is like, if things are going great now, don't live in dread and fear like something's going to happen.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
God is good. He's got this. But it is just as important to be consistent in getting to know God. Like you said, Kelly, stake in the ground when things are good as when things aren't good.
Yeah. I cannot overemphasize
Because it
the
is
need
harder.
to know
It's easier
God
when
and
you're
to be in the Word.
struggling. Not maybe struggling with doubt, but like just struggling in general.
Oh, yeah.
To pray.
Oh, yeah. I look back on any other time that I was going through a really hard time. Those were the times that I,
Yeah.
more than any other time had really drawn close. But I felt like there definitely was a shift at some point where I just stayed, stayed in it.
Mm-hmm.
Just developed some habits and stuck with it. Like I'm going to be in the Word. I'm going to be in prayer. Like I'm going to spend time with God every day.
Yeah.
Really get to know him. And I don't know, if my dad had died 10, 15 years ago,
Right. Might have
if
been
I
different.
would have experienced it very differently.
Yeah.
In terms of just my own personal reaction or my relationship with God during it.
Well, it's kind of funny. You looked at your own self, kind of like Satan looked at Job a little bit. Like he was like, "Oh, sure, he's close to you, God, because his life's so blessed."
Exactly.
Now let's see what happens. And you were almost looking at it like, "Well, let's see what happens now."
Right.
My life's blessed, but a little less blessed right
Right.
now.
And to
Feels
know
like
that, like, God, call it what you want to. God caused it to happen. God allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
It happened under God's sovereign control.
Of course.
And who am I to say?
Yeah. Sometimes easier to think about for other people, though, when it's you.
Right. Right.
I've had that conversation with people at a certain point, not in the beginning, but it's like, I don't even know if there's a God. And I'm like,
Then you don't know him.
right. Because it's
begin
like,
with.
you knew these things happened to other people, right?
Right.
Now that it happened to you, there's no God.
Right.
It's a little
Yeah.
self-focused. I don't know if I'll call it selfish, self-focused, that suddenly there's no God because I'm hurting. But it is a common reaction, and I think it is born out of not walking closely with him leading into it. Yeah, it's shaky faith, like you said, on the sand.
Yeah.
Were there any, I know you're in the Word all the time, was there any specific verses or passages that you remember, whether it's initially or since, that you kind of leaned on more than others?
I don't think so. I remember, can't even remember the reference. I wish I could, but some verse being almost like the Lord, like I was thinking about this in terms of my dad, like that it is a mercy for God to take people early,
Okay.
something along
Yeah.
those lines. I'm totally butchering the verse, but something like that, like in terms of our perspective of like, why now, Lord, to be like, good for you, Dad. You got to be released early. I think
Right.
that was how, like, I wish I could remember the reference, but
Yeah.
something along those lines where instead of being like, oh, what's comforting to me is being like, good for my dad,
Right.
Yeah.
Even
Even though we could look at, oh, but he didn't get to experience grandkids. Well, heaven's better than grandkids. Well, he didn't get to, heaven's better.
Yeah.
Instead of just
Hopefully he'll need
wishing
his
what
grandkids
could have
more.
been here is just being like, well, he's better off.
Right.
He's better off there.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, the Word kind of obviously helped with you with that. And I'm like you. It's like I'm in the Word all the time, but sometimes it's not specific. It's just a sort of a.
There was a couple things I was actually pulling out my notebook before. So apparently I had been in Isaiah right around that time. And like, for instance, like the week before, Isaiah 45:7, he brings prosperity and creates disaster. So certain truths, like those are the kinds of things that I was
Reading before.
feeding my soul with before.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
he forms us in the womb and summons us by name. Well, he summoned my dad by name, to go back to him. And, woe to him who quarrels with his maker. These were a lot of Isaiah. You know what I mean? So it's like, these were the verses that were fresh in my mind that week before. And to go back and be like, whoa, like before him, every knee will bow. Like, how dare I question him? Like he brings good, he brings bad. Yeah.
Do you think it changed anything specific? It changed how you looked at life, wife, mother, ministry, the things that you do?
I mean, obviously, it sounds cliche, but just like, hug your loved ones. You never know when your last day is going to be with them, that kind of thing. It's like, that's the thing that like everybody else can say it, but you really don't get it until it happens to you. Right. Like, could this be the last time I see somebody?
Because losing someone that suddenly too, because I've often thought like, I am so thankful for my mom that she didn't have a lingering illness, because that's terrible.
I just had this conversation with somebody whose family member is going through a very long and drawn out thing. And I was like, man.
But I think to some degree, I mean, there's pros and cons.
There's pros and cons about both,
but like,
right?
You start to grieve.
Yeah.
And it's it's less, it's like the faucet gets turned on rather than a fire hose.
Right.
When like with your dad, like with my mom, boom, they're gone. And you're like, wait, what?
Right.
And that is not easy.
It's like, I was trying to think of it like a fulcrun. Like you're either going to have to put a lot more pressure over a longer distance or less pressure over a shorter distance. But it's like, like one of my best friends, her in-laws both are just like the memory loss and the like all long ongoing issues. And I'm like, like, gosh, I just look at the way she's suffering and the way that their family is suffering. And I'm like,
very hard.
And I'm like, would I trade that? In some ways, I kind of feel like it was a mercy that it just happened quickly. Like you're reeling afterwards for so much longer. Right. So it's just like, oh, you're going to grieve more before? You're going to grieve more after?
You're not
I don't know.
compared at all. But you
can't compare it. But in some ways, I do look back.
But at least you can deal with it.
Thank you, Lord, that it.
Yeah. And especially for the person you love. Like that. Like for your dad's sake. I mean, you didn't feel well for a little bit there. And
but I do look at that as a mercy. Like, thank you, Lord, that he didn't suffer a long bout with cancer or something.
Yeah, he could.
Again, maybe why does some people do?
Or Alzheimer's or something. Maybe he was going to get hit with something. You just don't know. We're not God. But like, that's how you have to look at it. As God was like, no. It was my mercy.
Yeah, like at a really good time on a happy Sunday morning. Just
yeah. Anything else that it kind of, especially when you minister to others, I think you kind of mentioned it, but like be there for people. But anything else that it changed you?
Yeah, I think it just like, it's just more of a tenderness, like more of like a soft heartedness. Like I get what you're going through. I understand it now. And just wishing I had that a little earlier, like I'm just like,
that's what life brings experience.
But I'm like, I if I went through another 20 years, not really understanding grief, that like I would have missed out on getting to minister to other people in a better way,
Yeah, I felt the same way. That's the only time, like, dealing with a lot of people that are suffering through
especially
depression.
As a pastor, you think of that, like
whatever reason they're depressed for, that's the only time I've ever, and it wasn't long, thankfully. It wasn't like clinical depression or it was situational. So it was a couple months that I felt like kind of just laying on the couch and not getting up kind of stuff. And I never understood that. Like, it was hard for me to empathize. Right. I did on the surface, but inside I'm like, come on, man, let's go.
Yeah, exactly. You can't just, you can't.
And now, even though it might be someone depressed for a totally different reason, I just have way more empathy because I felt it. I'm like, I get it. Like, you should get up and do something, but you just don't feel like it. But yeah, it gives you more empathy, funerals or with those types of things, just kind of. And for me, it sort of repauses, like you said, what's really important. And I try to do that, especially depending on the circumstance, but like who passed away and what funeral it is. But I do try to be like, and it's hard not to. It's just really hard, even though I do it a lot. It's really hard not to say, man, what am I doing? Like, why am I so worried about that?
Right. Well, it's funny, even like very little specific things like, okay, I went through that when I had like younger kids.
Yeah.
And okay, so people were coming by with meals. You know, kids,
Yeah.
picky eaters.
Yeah, of
They're not
course.
gonna eat anything anybody
Catherine
else
wasn't
brings.
picky.
Some random casserole shows up
My
or something,
dad still
and she's
says,
not
Catherine
touching
still
that.
skin her hot dogs?
Yeah.
They
Oh, yes,
sell
she
them that
does.
way now. I saw them in the
No,
store.
we've always bought skinless hot
Oh,
dogs.
they do?
She skins the skinless hot dogs.
So just buy regular ones at
Yes,
that point.
no, KM skinless. That's what we've always had.
Oh, I
But
didn't know they made those.
but even something as silly as that, it was like people were dropping off meals and I was still having to prepare something else for my kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You're trying
just
to think,
within the
what
last
do your
couple
kids
weeks,
want?
I had a friend that needed a meal and I was like, what do your kids want?
Yeah.
Because I remember that,
Yeah.
what it was like.
Yeah.
Those little things matter, like feed my kids and me, So
Yeah, because I'll still have to cook.
yes, exactly.
Whether it's heat up the nuggets.
Right,
I'll have to do
exactly.
something.
Can I bring the nuggets so you don't have to do it? So something along those lines.
I remember a neighbor brought us a sheet of Jell-O, and my dad's kind of picky, and so he like, oh, thanks. He shuts the door, and he like literally like it slid off the pan into the
trash.
garbage. And Heather was mad. She kind of likes Jell-O. She was going to give it a shot. He's like, nah, we don't need
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's important. Like, or whether they have kids or not, like young kids like that, or just
thinking
like, what do
practically.
you want?
Thinking practically.
And if you're not a good cook, try it.
Don't.
Give them gift cards. Bring
Yes,
them,
don't.
bring them the steaks bombs or something.
Right.
Yeah, empathy is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing about grief is everybody will go through it unless you die very young and you don't go through it.
Right.
And so I think that's why I wanted to, we've had grief obviously, but I haven't had anyone on the podcast yet that lost a parent.
Mm.
I don't think. No, I've had child and spouse, but not a parent.
Mm-hmm.
They're all a little bit different,
Right.
The
Right.
child's the worst, no matter what.
Oh,
Right? Like that's the one thing
Yep.
I've said to God. I
no.
think
can't
that's the one
even.
thing I can't handle.
Yeah.
But I'm not testing you. So I don't
Right.
need to be tested.
Right.
Let's just assume I could.
No,
and move
seriously.
on. So that's the worst. But and parent is more natural.
Of course. Like most people.
But you were
would go
pretty,
through it
but
this
not
way.
when they're that young. Not that your dad was like 40, but that's a whole nother thing. If you're a kid and you lose your parent.
Right.
But
Right.
it's hard when you're like, I thought I had another 10, 20 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to change.
But you don't know. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's just such a great, such a great lesson to just say, what is my life really about?
Mm-hmm. And it's funny, yeah, because I was trying to think like, what was their last question? Is even just thinking about that for me too, that I was like, what if me? What if I suddenly die?
Yeah.
It does make you think like that. And
Sure.
just little things like, what state is my house in? Have I prepared my kids, with whatever they need, spiritually, or what kind of legacy do I want to
What kind
leave
of bathrobe
behind?
do I have?
Yes, exactly.
No,
Always
absolutely.
But
Yeah.
that's definitely been kind of, I don't want to say ongoing, but that's
Yeah.
been something that's definitely persisted since my dad died. I don't think I really thought much about that at all before, because you just think, oh, it's not going to
I
happen
got
to
plenty
me.
of time.
Um,
I'll die as an old
but
lady.
I've
and
definitely thought about that
Yeah.
a lot, of just being like uber intentional with the
Mhm.
way that I live my life, and just thinking of that, like, what am I leaving behind? Like if I was to die today, what state is my house in? What state are my affairs in? Like
Mhm.
what, even like last memories, I think of that a lot too. Like,
Yeah. I don't want it to last me being frustrated with you and yelling at
yeah,
you.
like my last memory, like mine and my kids' last memory with my dad was about a week before. And it was Darren's holiday party for work.
Yep.
And he and my mom were babysitting, but my mom had probably given up sooner and gone back. And he was the one that was going to stay up late at the
Yep.
house.
Yep.
So it was at our house. And we came home really late. And he was just sitting by the glow of the Christmas tree in our living room, reading his Bible, because he brought it with him. And he had picked up my Valley of Vision book that was like sitting next to him. He had never heard of it or seen it before. And he had picked it up and started reading and made some comment about like whatever it was that he had read in there and how much he really enjoyed it. He ended up taking a picture of it and then emailed it to me like the next day and was like, oh, this was the one I had read. I really liked it, whatever. So like that was another kind of like special memory that like
It's like the
That
last.
was our last memory, was like he tucked my kids into bed that night. He
Yeah.
prayed with them before they went to sleep. We had, like, I had that memory of him like leaving my house with his Bible and talking about a prayer book, and got to hug him and say goodnight and thank you. Like, he babysat my kids. Like, that was my last memory with him.
Yeah.
So I can look back on that and being like, thank you, Lord. Because sometimes like a couple weeks go by and you don't see your parents. And I could have been
Sure.
like, wait a minute, what was the last thing I did what was the last thing I said? But I had a very clear, positive memory
Yeah.
because of just the way that happened to work out. So that was another thing that I can just look back and be like, oh, as sucky as that was, like, I just have the mercy of that, like, kind of happy, really happy last memory, like a positive thing.
Yeah.
And my kids had that too. Like, the last thing Grandpa did for you is tuck you into bed and say good, pray for you and say good night. Like,
And just be there.
it doesn't get any, it kind of doesn't get any better than that.
No, it doesn't.
No,
It's like a bad movie. Like, come on.
yeah. So I was like, even in
I'm gonna start saying that to people
worst of
who are
it,
angry with me. Like, do you want this to be your last memory?
right? Even in the worst of it,
Sounds more ominous with that.
yes.
No, yeah.
Even in the worst of it, God was so good in it. And it
Yeah.
just made me think a lot more about,
Yeah.
is this how I want
Mm.
to be remembered if today was the day?
Yeah.
Not that I always think like that, but I do a lot more than I ever did before.
Yeah. Right. And your dad didn't think like that all the time.
Oh my
either,
gosh, no,
right?
that was just the way he lived.
Exactly.
And I
Right.
think the more maybe my motivation for it is that, but eventually it does become a pattern.
Is it you?
This is the
Your
way
character.
this is just the way I
Your
live.
character will come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my motivation was maybe like, oh, goodness.
But it's more about like you have the character. It's not like you don't. And it's not like whether you had a moment of frustration and then die.
Right.
Your overall character is going to shine through.
Right.
But it does cause you to say, well, what am I really emphasizing? Because even those of us, if we have good godly character, we are going to major on minor things.
Right.
Like it really, and this is part of life. We're going to do
Right.
that. But it's
Right.
really good to keep reminding yourself,
Yeah.
like, this is not going to matter in a week,
Right.
let alone.
Yeah. So I think that's a positive
Yeah.
that has come out of grief. It's just,
I had
being
somebody at
more
a meeting I was at
intentional.
today go, it's a book, or someone said, is your focus on resume building or eulogy or something? It was said so
Yeah.
much better than that.
Yeah.
But it was a really good way to put it. Like, you could be like a custodian your whole life, and I'm nothing against that, but you know what I mean? Nothing that everyone's going to be like, oh, wow, you're impressive.
Yeah,
You
nobody cares.
And at the funeral, there's 8 million people there
Right.
versus somebody who is the top CEO and nobody cares. They're there
Right.
because they have to be.
right.
Sort of the Scrooge sort of story, right? And it's like, yeah, people, what really matters is that eulogy legacy stuff. But we put a lot of more emphasis on the other stuff.
Right. Yes. My dad definitely taught me that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
And you saw that.
what do
play
people
out.
say at your funeral? That was your life. That was how you lived. That was your legacy. I can be intentional about
Yeah.
these things too.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being willing to share your story. And, this Christmas, I'm just praying that it's,
Yeah. Thank you.
it's a,
Next couple of weeks it'll be fresh.
yeah. Yeah.
again.
Well, let's just keep drawing you closer to your family. All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And cut. Nice.